I'm Great-Grandma Waterfall, and I'm going to read you the story of the elephant's child, and you can follow along in your own book. In the far and high off times, the elephant, oh best beloved, had no trunk. He only had a blackish, bulgy nose as big as a boot, and he could wiggle it about from side to side, but he could not pick things up with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, who was full of satiable curiosity. And that means he asked ever so many questions. And so now we're going to turn the page until we see, oh, some wonderful animals. Anyway, our elephant filled all of Africa with his satiable curiosities. He asked his tall aunt, the ostrich, why her tail feathers grew just so, and his tall aunt spanked him with her hard claw. He asked his tall uncle, the giraffe, what made his skin spotty, and his tall uncle spanked him with his hard hoof. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red, and his broad aunt spanked him with her broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so, and his hairy uncle spanked him with his hairy paw. He asked questions about everything that he saw, or heard, or felt, or smelt, or touched, and all his aunts and uncles spanked him, and still he was full of satiable curiosity. One fine morning, this elephant's child asked a new question that he'd never asked before. What does the crocodile have for dinner? Everybody said, hush, in a loud and dreadful tone, and they spanked him for a long time. And there we can see the animal saying, hush. Turn page, and here we see the Colo bird. By and by, he came on this Colo bird sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush. And he said, my father spanked me, my mother spanked me, all my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my satiable curiosity, and still I want to know, what does the crocodile have for dinner? Then the Colo bird said, with a mournful cry, go to the banks of the great gray-green, greasy Limpopo River and find out. Well, the very next morning, this elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the little short red kind, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purple kind, and 17 melons, the greenly, crackly kind, and said goodbye to all his dear families. Goodbye. I'm going to the great gray-green, greasy Limpopo River to find out what the crocodile has for dinner. And on the next page, there we see the Colo bird saying, goodbye. And then he went away, eating the melons and throwing the rind about, because he could not pick it up. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, from Kimberley to Kama's country, and from Kama's country he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last he came to the banks of the great gray-green, greasy Limpopo River. Now, you must know and understand, oh best beloved, that till that very week and day and hour and minute, the elephant's child had never seen a crocodile and did not know what one was like. Oh, on the next page, what do we see? It's the red and black. Well, let me tell you about it. The first thing that he found was a bicolored python rock snake, curled around a rock. Excuse me, said the elephant's child politely, but have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these promiscuous parts? Have I seen a crocodile? Said the bicolored python rock snake in a voice of dreadful scorn. What will you ask me next? Excuse me, said the elephant's child, but could you tell me what he has for dinner? And then the bicolored python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That is odd," said the elephant's child, "because my father and mother and my uncle and aunt, not to mention my other aunt and my other uncle, have all spanked me for my insatiable curiosity." And next we see, "Goodbye, goodbye." And it was the elephant's child that said goodbye very politely to the bi-colored python rock snake, and even helped to coil him up again on the rock. And then he went on his way eating melons, throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up, until he trod on and what he thought was a log of wood at the very edge of the great gray, green, greasy Limpopo River. Now he had stepped on this, what he thought was a log of wood, but it was really the crocodile, oh best beloved. And the crocodile winked one eye. And the elephant's child said, "Excuse me, but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these parts?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these most promiscuous parts?" And then the crocodile winked the other eye and lifted half of his tail out of the mud, and the elephant's child stepped back most politely. "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile. "Why do you ask such things?" And there on this page we can see the crocodile, and we can see the elephant's child. "Well, excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but my father spanked me, my mother spanked me, not to mention all my other relatives. And then even the bi-colored python rock snake with his scalesome flailsome tail spanked me. I don't want to be spanked any more." "Oh, come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "for I am the crocodile." And he wept crocodile tears to show that it was true. Then the elephant's child kneeled down on the bank and said, "You are the very person I have been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you have for dinner?" "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "and I'll whisper." Oh, goodness, what's going to happen next? Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth, and the crocodile caught him by his little bulby nose. "I think," said the crocodile between his teeth, "today I will begin with the elephant's child." Oh, at this, oh best beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose, "Let me go, you are hurting me." Then the bi-colored python rock snake scuffled down and said, "My young friend, if you do not now pull as hard as ever you can, it is my opinion that your acquaintance," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will jerk you into yonder limpid stream before you can say Jack Robinson." Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches, and he pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose began to stretch. And the crocodile floundered into the water, and he pulled and pulled and pulled. Oh, and there we see the nose just stretching. And as we turn the next page, the elephant's nose kept on stretching, and the elephant's child spread all his four little legs, and he pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose kept on stretching. And the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled and pulled and pulled. And at each pull, the elephant's child's nose grew longer and longer. And then the elephant's child felt his legs slipping, and he said through his nose, which was now nearly 5 feet long, "This is too much for me." And then the bi-colored python rock snake, and we can see how he's wound his tail around the elephant's leg, and he nodded himself, this is the snake, knotted himself in a double clove hitch around the elephant child's hind legs and said, "Rash and inexperienced traveler, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, that yonder self-propelling man of war," and by this, O best beloved, he meant the crocodile, "he will put an end to your future career." So the bicolored python rock snake pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, but the elephant's child and the bicolored python rock snake pulled the hardest, and at last the crocodile let go of the elephant child's nose with a plop that you could hear all up and down the Limpopo River. And then the elephant child sat down hard, but he was careful to say thank you to the bicolored python rock snake. And there we can see, thank you, bicolored python rock snake. And he was kind to his poor nose next. Oh, and he wrapped it up in cool banana leaves, and he hung it in the great gray-green, greasy Limpopo River to cool. "What are you doing that for?" said the bicolored python rock snake. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape, and I'm waiting for it to shrink." Well, the elephant's child sat there for 3 days waiting for its nose to shrink, but it never grew any shorter. Because, oh best beloved, the crocodile had pulled it out into a trunk the same as all elephants have today. And at the end of the 3rd day, a fly came and stung him on the shoulder. And before he knew what he was doing, the elephant's child lifted up his trunk and he hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said the bicolored python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear of a nose. Try and eat a little now." And before he even thought what he was doing, the elephant's child put out his trunk, plucked a large bundle of grass, and stuffed it in his mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bicolored python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said the elephant's child, and before he thought what he was doing, he slooped up a sloop of mud and slapped it on his head, where it made a cool, sloopy, sloshy mud cap and trickled behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bicolored python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose." "Thank you," said the elephant's child. "I'll remember that, and now I think I'll go home." And so the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit, he pulled it down from a tree. When he wanted grass, he plucked it up from the ground. And when the flies bit him, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk. And he made himself a new, cool, slushy, squishy mud cap whenever the sun was hot. When he felt lonely, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went especially out of his way to find a broad hippopotamus. He spanked her just once to make sure that the bicolored python rock snake had spoken the truth about his new trunk. And such a tidy elephant, he picked up the melon rinds that he had dropped on his way to the great gray-green greasy Limpopo River. One dark evening he came back to all his dear families, and he coiled up his trunk and said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him and said, "Come here and be spanked for your insatiable curiosity." "Pooh," said the elephant's child, "I don't think you know anything about spanking. I'll show you." And he uncurled his trunk and knocked over 2 of his dear brothers, head over heels. "Oh, bananas," they said. "Where did you learn that trick?" And what have you done to your nose? I got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great gray, green, greasy Limpopo River, said the elephant's child. Turn one more page. It looks very ugly, said his uncle, the baboon. Oh, it does, said the elephant's child, but it's very, very useful. And then would you imagine that that elephant's child spanked all his dear families? How unkind, how naughty, but he never let anyone touch the Colo bird. At last, things grew so exciting that his dear families went off one by one to the banks of the great gray, green, greasy Limpopo River to borrow new noses from the crocodile. When they came back, nobody spanked anybody anymore, and ever since that day, oh best beloved, all the elephants you will ever see have trunks like the trunk of the insatiable elephant's child. And that, oh best beloved, is the end of our story.